Fuel injection basics is here to stay. And here's why. Find out. Let's start this by saying I am not a fuel injection expert. There's a lot of guys out there that are good at that. They can tune it. They're experts at it. I will just say that I've put a lot of fuel injection systems in. And I'm just going to give you some basic tips or things that I've done or seen over the last few years. But number one, first of all, fuel injection's changed a lot in the last 5 years. It's been around for a long time. And about 10 years ago, everybody started really doing well with it. But in the last 5 years, the demand has been amazing on a lot of, I guess you'd call it entry level or basic build cars, which is just awesome. I mean, even myself, my car was carbureted, and we went to fuel injection. I thought it was time since I'd put a bunch of other fuel injection systems in. So I'm telling you, I'm not an expert, but I'm going to tell you some of the things I've come across and found with every system. And let's talk about the systems. So when we're talking about fuel injection systems, okay, they basically come in 3 categories. There might be some variances in there, but your first real one that you always find is a throttle body. Okay, throttle body fuel injection. This is probably going to be majority of your kits. Like guys are sticking them on small block Chevys, small block Ford, Mopars, and so on. This bolts right onto your stock intake manifold that you already had, that you had your carburetor on, and bam, you start setting it up for fuel injection. Really kind of cool. Fuel injection kit number 2 is usually a multi-port system like this, where you have multiple injectors down it, and it has a throttle body on the front, and it takes all the air in. And then on the third system, you have a multi-port and throttle body kit, kind of like we have in this truck. You can see it's got a throttle body. Let's take a look. So it's got the throttle body as the main part, and then it has individual injectors down the side, so it's ported on each one. So that's kind of a throttle body multi-port. You have a multi-port, and then the everyday one that everybody knows is a throttle body goes right on top of them. That's really your 3 basic fuel injection systems. So on those fuel injection systems that we were just talking about, I wrote a couple of things down, and we'll talk about them. The top one being grounds. And we're going to talk about fuel. We're going to talk about idle and stumbling off idle that you usually have. We're talking about cars running rich. We're going to talk about regulators, and then fuel delivery. So that's some real basics, and we'll go look at those. Let's start with grounds. So when we're talking about grounds, I'm not here to beat anybody up. I'm just going to kind of show you the basics. So when you've got your small block Chevy, we're going to take that as a perfect example. Okay, and your small block Chevy has your battery right here, and you have one ground, right, from the battery to the chassis. Then you have your second ground, and usually it's from your block to the chassis. That's it. That's just about every single small block. And 2 grounds to make it run is super easy. When you get into a fuel injection system, it starts about 4 or 5, and you're going to want to make sure they're all really good. You need you get the same ones you had before: battery to frame, frame to motor. But then you need head to block, or head to fuel injection, and then you want to do head to firewall, head to firewall. It just, the more grounds you can have, the better it is. It even on your alternator, like I use a higher amp, what is it called? Power Master amp, and it has its own ground. So it has a ground from the case to the frame. So I think my car has like 7 grounds on it. And when your wires look like this, often this is going to give you an issue. I mean, there's a lot of feedback and noise that's going to come off of this. And what I mean by that, you see, it's not as big a problem anymore. RFI on the cars, they've kind of learned to tone it down on on a lot of these fuel injection kits. But I'm gonna tell you, you have radio interference. Have you ever gotten in your hot rod and you turned your radio on and ring ring revved it up and you can hear that motor rev a little bit through the speakers? That's RFI. That's interference. It's going to interfere with your fuel injection system. That carburetor doesn't care. The fuel injection system that's running a computer, okay? It's now a computer with multiple inputs and its own ground. Doesn't matter whose brand you have, Holley's or this guy's, you know. They require more ground. Okay. All right. We're going to look back at that list again. So we just talked about grounds. Let's talk about fuel. Man, fuel. So if you're doing a fuel injection system and you want to go crazy and do all of it, you know, ignition, distributor, all that, my suggestion, takes a little longer, but my suggestion is if the car is already good and it's already running, just do the fuel part first. Put the throttle body on there, set it up, make it run well. It's usually only one wire anyways. You have to hook to your distributor, right? So what does it matter at this point? Get the fuel system on, make it run good, drive it up and down the street. Man, it feels great. Now pull your distributor and your coil and all that other stuff and upgrade it the way you want. And then when it runs terrible, you know where you're working at, right? You're working electronics. You're not working with fuel because the fuel ran great. It just narrows it down. Takes a little longer, but man, if you narrow it down, you're going to be way ahead of the game. All right? So let's talk about that. I mean, we just talked about that. So let's talk about idle and stumble. Well, okay. Let's talk about that one then. Okay, I didn't make these rules up. I'm just telling you what I've learned on these basics of putting fuel injection systems in. And what I mean by putting fuel, I mean, I got a Phytech system going in that one. This has a GM setup. This has a Holley Terminator X system in it. This car has the ACES system in it. That's also a GM computer. Small block Chevy. Just basics we want to talk about. So I don't make this up. This is a throttle body fuel injection system. They work great unless you have the big hot for teacher smoking cam, okay? Then out of the box, that is going to need to be run a little bit richer, and you probably even need a little bit more timing. And they really don't like to have less than 10 inches of mercury. That's the measurement for vacuum that's inside the intake manifold. If you don't have a way to measure it, here's a simple one. Are you able to run a brake booster? If you are, without a canister or air pressure system or anything, you're probably okay with this system, with one of these. If you cannot run a booster because your cam is too big and you have no vacuum, you're going to have to tune your car. Either you're going to have to tune it or you're going to have to tuner tune the car. So let's talk about this second part of that, right? So your throttle body idles great, but has a slight stumble, okay, off of idle. I get it. This is where you have to start tuning just a hair. So in that something like that, you're going to want to adjust your idle air or cruise air. I'm looking at my notes right here to make sure I'm telling you correctly. I don't want to tell you wrong. And often that can help fix some of your off idle or stumble air. So if you're in the fuel injection tuning table and you see cruise air, idle air, you can add more right there. You can also, and it's not every time, sometimes it doesn't work, you can add more timing. A lot of tuners like to stop at 10 degrees. They think that's maximum, and I have found that is not correct. Some cars like 14, some cars like 16. My car loves 20 at idle. It's the way it is. Angry, mean, happy, 20 degrees at idle. So That, adjust your idle air if you're stumbling. If that doesn't help, add timing. Sometimes it could be a combination of both. Simple. So we're going to talk about the car running rich. Here's the magic that everybody talks about. It's a self-tuning system. It really isn't. It's a plus and minus. I don't know how you would describe it. System. So when you put your fuel injection in, you have your O2 sensor. It knows the car or the system basically has a target air fuel ratio that it needs to hit. And all it's doing is reading the air as it comes out of the exhaust. That's it. And it adjusts the fuel. It's not learning anything. It's just reacting. It says, well, I got too much. Let's lean it down. Well, I don't have enough. Let's richen it up. This is where everybody has or not everybody, I shouldn't say that. It's where a lot of guys have a problem. Man, the car is super rich. Well, did you find exhaust leaks in it? Really? Because the car only self-learns what you teach it. And if you teach it wrong, it will be crappy. And it won't recover instantly. For example, if you have an exhaust leak and it's at the collector, let's say, and you, oh man, my car's running rich, I found an exhaust leak, turn it off. Cool. You fixed your exhaust leak, you start it back up, but there's still a little exhaust leak somewhere else, right? Well, it's going to start up right where it left off, already rich because it's adjusting for your first air leak. If you start it back up and you haven't fixed all the air leaks and it's reading that it's still an air leak, it's already rich. It's going to add more, right? So now you're rich twice till you fix it. And every time you shut the car off and you start it back up, if you haven't fixed the rich problem, it's going to keep adding more till your eyes are watering, your spark plugs start to foul, your O2 sensor takes a dump, and now it's going to cost you money. You got to put a new O2 sensor in there because they don't magically clean themselves. And here's the tough part. It won't self-correct instantly. So you're either going to have to wipe out what it learned completely, a tune, reset basically, or a wizard retune, or whatever, or reset, or whatever they have on there, or you're going to have to break open directions from whatever manufacturer you got and then see if they have a tuning section in there that tells you how to reduce that richness, at least for a little bit. You can do it yourself. I mean, once all the exhaust leaks are gone, it's pretty. I mean, you can park your car outside, start it up, let it run for 10 minutes, shut it off. Let it run 10 more minutes, shut it off. Let it run for 10 minutes. Every time you do that, if everything is correct, it will slowly readjust the AFR, right? Reducing the amount of richness it is, bringing it back to a good run. It's not a self-learning system. It's a reactionary system, and it only reacts to what you teach it. And if you put that in wrong, it comes out wrong. All right, we've talked about several different things. Well, let's talk about that, the regulator. Regulators. I get this all the time. People ask, what is a proper regulator for me? And a good fuel injection regulator will have a boost reference port right there. Boost reference port is often used for part of your tuning. Throttle body kits where the injectors are located above the throttle plates. Usually these, because it's open to atmosphere, you won't use a boost reference port. Okay? But when the injectors are behind the throttle butterflies, there's your butterfly up here, your throttle plate, your injectors are back here. There's a difference in balance back there. So often you will use that little port, your boost reference port, to help keep a balance going across the injectors. What I mean by that is, if the engine idles at 16 roughly inches of mercury, that's equivalent to 8 psi of negative pressure. As a result of that, you get line pressure changed by 8%. So that can be tough on the fuel injection system. It's not a steadfast rule because I know like Phytech and some of the new Holly stuff, they have changed it around to move. I don't know if you can see it in there. So these injectors, their shots are coming from underneath. Can you see them here? And they're shooting through the holes below the butterfly. And doing that keeps the fuel under that atmospheric level. I'm not sure what they actually call that. Like I said, I'm not the EFI expert. So you won't need a boost reference port. So that's really, I don't know, that's kind of easy stuff right there. Often, if you go through your instruction manuals, it will tell you in here that what regulator they recommend, and go with it. I mean, if it's a couple dollars extra, spend that couple dollars extra. That way your EFI system works great. You know, I see guys like, this one's okay setup. Used one of the Corvette filters underneath. I mean, I think they're okay. They work okay. I mean, I think I did that one with a Corvette filter in that one. And then other cars, I always use the nice regulator with a boost reference. Nope. So we've talked about, where's my pin over here? We talked about ground, we talked about fuel, we talked about idle and tuning, if you need it or not. We talked about rich, we talked about the regulators, and we're going to talk about the blame game. And what I mean by that is oftentimes there's an ignition issue problem that happens, and people immediately, because ignition is now more important with a fuel injection system than it is with the carburetor. And simple things like, frozen advances um, now really make the car hesitant, rusted internals, a bad cap, bad plug wires, all those things. And you start blaming, oh, fuel injection is terrible. And it could be just a simple, small thing. Well, and here's a perfect example. I had a customer that has to put a throttle body fuel injection system on his car and did a beautiful job. Wired everything perfectly, had the handheld controller inside. And he kept telling me, man, it's got a bad stumble. It's got a bad stumble. I said, well, tune it. So he called the tuner. The tuner helped him for like 2 or 3 weeks. Got it running pretty decent. And then he brought it to me, or came to me and said, my car still has a stumble at takeoff. I thought, well, that's kind of crazy after you've had it tuned and everything else. And on top of that, he even sent it back to the manufacturer. The manufacturer tested everything and said, well, your software's a little out of date. We'll update it. We kept your tune in there and we sent it back to you. Beautiful, right? He gets it back, puts it in the car, same exact stumble off of idle. Couldn't figure it out. He brings it over to me and he's complaining about it. I said, well, take me for a ride. We get in his car and we drive not even down the block. And I said, well, that's a mechanical issue. Well, no, it's not. Yeah, it is, because it does it when you shift it to the second gear too. There's a stumble right up as you let the clutch out. There is, so we did it again, and he realized that. He went home and checked, and the clutch he had put in only 4 or 5 months ago, which was supposed to have 120 thousandths clearance because he put a hydraulic clutch in his vintage Chevelle, had less than 10 thousandths. He had a 10 thousandths feeler gauge and couldn't get it between the throwout bearing and the clutch. So what it was doing, it was chattering a little bit as he was coming off throttle. Once you got the RPMs up and everything was spooling nicely, car ran great. Off idle or right off of takeoff, stumbled every time. And he kept blaming the fuel injection system because he knew that his clutch was new and everything else. But there was, again, another mechanical issue that he was blaming the fuel injection for. So it literally could be a whole gamut of things. I hope these couple little suggestions I gave you help. Like I said, remember, more grounds. Make sure your fuel's right. If you're doing a big setup, only do the little setup first. What I mean by that is, if you're going to do all your ignition system and your fuel injection, just change the throttle body first. If the car's already running good, right? Then make it run good again, and then switch out your electrical. If you have an idle or stumble issue, or you're running a really big cam, um, you know, if your cam is so big you can't run a brake booster, you're more than likely going to have to tune it. I don't make these rules up, it's just what I've seen. And you're going to need a little bit more fuel, so it's going to have to run richer, and you're going to have to add a little bit more timing, 15, 20 degrees of initial timing at your idle. If it's running rich, go find an exhaust leak. It's there. If not, maybe your two sensors bad. It happens. Get the proper regulator for it. That way you can get your boost air reference if you can, or if you don't need it, it's fine too. But a good regulator really does make a difference. I mean, I know you bought your system for only $900 or what it is, and now all of a sudden you're thinking, man, I have to spend another $150 on a good regulator. You do. Just buy a really good one. Don't buy an Amazon one, really, and then put it in. Then fuel delivery, I guess. I mean, make sure your fuel's getting to the engine right. Don't play the blame game. Make sure all your mechanicals are right, and then that's it. Can't think of much else. So that was my basics of the basics for fuel injection from a non-fuel injection expert. I'm not a fuel injection expert. Did I say that already? Not a fuel injection expert. All right. I got to get back to work. Bye.